Is it too late to stop a no deal Brexit?
Well, the House of Commons, it has to be remembered, has already passed the Article 50 Act and the Withdrawal Act. So the law, passed by the House of Commons, agreed by the House of Commons, is that we leave on the 31st of October with or without a deal. So just for the status quo to maintain means that we leave without a deal unless a deal is passed. So when people say the House of Commons will stop it, they're rather forgetting that the House of Commons has already agreed to it.
It seems extremely complex to try to stop leaving the EU without a deal now. But there are a number of mechanisms already in place that Parliament can challenge the government with, should they fail to reach an agreed deal with the EU. Before we begin this video, I just want to explain that I really enjoy looking at the policies, the arguments and the laws to predict the future of our country. I always try and balance the arguments for and against a certain topic. So if you want to know how the future of Britain will be under Brexit or any other topic, please let me know by hitting that subscribe button. Jacob Rees-Mogg's case is that the Article 50 Act, more formally known as the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Act from 2017, gave Theresa May the permission to notify the EU of the UK's intention to withdraw from the European Union to trigger the Article 50 process, and she did. She sent a letter to the European Commission doing just that. The Act also superseded the European Communities Act of 1972, which was the Act created when we joined the EU that was agreed and amended as being an EU member to include things like the single market, the customs union and other EU law. But the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Act makes sure that the UK, in effect, is not subject to any previous or alternative legislation other than the Article 50 process, making sure that our relationship with the EU was about leaving, not about staying in. The Article 50 process is well known by now, that the treaty shall cease to apply to the state in question from the date of entry into force of the withdrawal agreement, or failing that, 2 years after the notification referred to in paragraph 2, unless the European Council, in agreement with the member state concerned, unanimously decides to extend this period. So we decided to extend leaving the EU till October the 31st. Now Robin Tilbrook argues that we didn't do this correctly, and we actually already left on the 29th of March 2019, but there's already a video about that on my channel if you want to check it out. For now, let's just focus on this October the 31st date. Now, leaving the EU doesn't have to be done with Article 50. The UK could simply repeal the European Communities Act of 1972, therefore disaggreeing and not participating in all the things that we agreed to when we joined and everything since. So stop going to EU meetings, not recognising EU law in our courts, but then the UK would be breaching all the EU treaties, and our international trust for conforming to international treaties would suffer as a result, along with any potential future treaty with the EU. Article 50 gives the UK the opportunity to create a deal with the EU that will protect things like EU citizens' rights abroad and tariff-free trade by making something more than just a trade deal that becomes both EU and UK law. So yes, while Jacob Rees-Mogg so far is right about leaving the EU on October the 31st, the Article 50 Act is about trying to negotiate a deal by an indefinitely extendable deadline, within the constraints of that deadline being agreed by both the EU and the UK, of course. It's not explicitly just leaving the EU without a deal on its own, otherwise Parliament would have already agreed to repeal the European Communities Act.
Only Parliament can grant rights to the British people, and only Parliament can take them away. No Prime Minister, no government can expect to be unanswerable or unchallenged. Parliament alone is sovereign.
But if it took the Gina Miller case to decide that the Prime Minister had to consult Parliament with a piece of primary legislation just to enact Article 50, what does that mean for leaving without a deal? Does Parliament need to vote on that? Well, we'll come on to that later, but first, the European Withdrawal Act of 2018 does repeal the European Communities Act of 1972. So this was a separate act created in 2018 that comes into effect when exit day is reached. And it was amended on the 11th of April 2019 to set in stone exit day that the treaty ceased to apply to the UK as 11 p.m. on the 31st of October 2019. So yes, Parliament has once again agreed to leave on a specified date, but it doesn't stop the UK asking for a further extension, nor does it stop the EU denying a further extension. So Rees-Mogg has also said that there are two ways to stop a no deal Brexit: a change to the law or a change to the government. Now, a change to the government will require either a motion of no confidence or the government calling a snap election. We'll come to that later. But first, let's look at what it would require to change the law to stop a no deal Brexit. The first thing to note about the likelihood of a no deal Brexit is that the UK government, along with the Cabinet, did sign up to the Withdrawal Agreement, along with the £39 billion expected to pay towards the EU and the backstop. There's talk in relation to the money in particular that because Britain signed up to a medium-term budgetary framework back in 2013, that is due to end in 2020, that therefore the UK is still obliged to pay. The same could be said when the UK signed up to the Good Friday Agreement if that contradicted newly signed up to World Trade Organization rules. While the European courts might not be able to have jurisdiction over the UK anymore, it could be taken to the International Court in The Hague, and The Hague might rule to force the UK to pay up, or that the UK could face international pressure to be forced to adopt the backstop if the situation became unstable in Northern Ireland, essentially making a no deal ineffective. Then there are a number of amendments to the bills in UK law I've talked about that make it harder to leave the EU or for the UK to put into effect a no deal Brexit. For example, there's the House of Lords amendment to the EU Withdrawal Act to ensure existing environmental standards are maintained after Brexit. Theresa May then put forward a motion that enabled MPs to make their own amendments when her deal was rejected. Yvette Cooper's amendment mandated the Prime Minister to extend Article 50. Yvette Cooper then tried to extend Article 50 till the end of 2019. This was defeated along with other calls for extensions beyond October the 31st, for now. But that's not to say that Parliament can't force through a vote that helps them take control of the process, or that the Prime Minister can't once again open up the bill to amendments, one of which being a further extension to Article 50. Then there's also an amendment which protects EU citizens' rights in the UK regardless of the outcome of negotiations. Another more recent amendment to the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill of 2019 makes it harder for the government to prorogue Parliament to force through a no-deal Brexit. The bill itself is about getting the Northern Ireland Assembly sitting again. It extends the period provided to appoint ministers for Northern Ireland, for the Northern Ireland Assembly, and forces the Secretary of State to report on progress towards the formation of an executive in Northern Ireland. Because of devolution, there's a subsection in it that limits the power of the London Parliament's ruling over Northern Ireland, so that Northern Ireland itself has more power. If both houses of Parliament can't decide on a bill which affects Northern Ireland within 28 days, then that bill ceases to have any effect on Northern Ireland. But then there's another section, which says, in calculating the period of 28 days mentioned in subsection 5, no account is to be taken of any time during which Parliament is dissolved or prorogued, or during which both houses are adjourned for more than 4 days. In other words, it makes it harder for the Prime Minister to prorogue or disband Parliament, so that means that Parliament during the end of negotiations could create laws such as a bill to take over parliamentary proceedings and another Article 50 extension. That would make it harder for the Prime Minister to implement a no-deal Brexit. But there are many no-deal amendments which have been defeated, such as the Spellman no-deal amendment, which was advisory stating that the UK will leave the EU without a deal, which was defeated by 318 votes to 310. The SNP and Plaid Cymru also called for no deal to be removed as a negotiating option, which again was defeated by 327 votes to 288. The Cooper-Letwin Bill, also known as the European Union Withdrawal Act of 2019, received just one vote in favour of extending Article 50 to stop a no-deal Brexit. But another amendment, which would have given Parliament control over the whole process, was tied on 310 votes either way, and so was not added. Dominic Grieve also added a number of amendments to the Northern Ireland Bill to force MPs to come to the Commons in the run-up to October the 31st, but it was rejected by the Speaker. As for the future, Parliament could continue this pattern of watering down, rejecting and pushing back a No Deal Brexit. The government might put forward bills to prepare for a No Deal Brexit, and Parliament could add an amendment pushing back exit date even further, or they could simply reject that preparation itself. But creating a piece of legislation that indicates a clear majority for any outcome might take more than just persuasion. It might mean some foul play. On the advice of the Privy Council, the Queen can formally prorogue Parliament, meaning MPs can't do any of the things I just talked about, and the Article 50 clock, which is also set in UK legislation, can be allowed to run out. So that by 11 PM on the 31st of October 2019, the UK leaves the EU without a deal. But it probably won't happen because the advice from the Privy Council could be challenged in court. The Queen might not want to become political, and Parliament might turn against the government if they look likely to do this anyway, calling for a motion of no confidence. The other way, if Parliament does become intransigent, is to run down the clock by giving them loads of bills on other subjects, as well as kind of phantom Brexit bills that the government is happy for Parliament to reject anyway, and then watch time run out. You can always take the situation back to the courts if MPs look likely to take over parliamentary business. Because on the one hand, the Gina Miller case ruled that only Parliament is sovereign, while on the other, she rules that a piece of primary legislation can only be implemented by the government. So why should it be legally possible for Parliament to take over business without a no-deal motion by the government that could be amended by Parliament and changed to include an extension, and then that amendment with the extension gets voted on and approved? Either way, if there was such a court case between Parliament and the government, it will either mean that Parliament responds with a no-confidence motion against the government, or that the government responds with a rejected bill that was meant to implement a no-deal Brexit. Either way, even if we have a rejected bill that was meant to implement a no-deal Brexit, or a no-confidence motion, it might mean that time runs out before exit day and the European Union Withdrawal Act is reached, meaning that the European Communities Act of 1972 is automatically repealed because time runs out and we leave the EU. Why would a no-confidence motion run down time? Well, under the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act of 2011, if the government is defeated, the House must then adopt a motion of no confidence against the same or alternative government within 14 days. If they're defeated, then a general election is held. Under the Electoral Registration and Administration Act of 2013, Parliament must be dissolved within 25 working days of a general election. This gives about 39 days, plus or minus weekends, bank holidays, and whether that full 14 days is actually used, as well as polling day and the actual motion day itself. So Parliament is on recess until the 3rd of September, which takes until the 17th of September to form a government of national unity, leaving till the 24th of October as the earliest date for a general election, 1 week before Brexit Day, making the first week back in September crucial for anti-no deal plotters. So as of making this video, it is still possible to stop a no deal Brexit. Even a government of national unity could do it at an even later date. But is it right to stop a no deal Brexit? Join in the debate below and subscribe.